Greetings! I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to be building an M3 Honey, aka Stuart, in 15mm or 1/100 scale. As you can probably see on the box, this model is made by the Plastic Soldier Company, and you can make 5 M3 or M3A1 light tanks. The back of the box gives us a little bit of information about the contents of the box, but is mostly occupied by a painting guide, which lists Vallejo colours. Inside the box we find 5 of these sprues. These are neatly moulded with decent detail. There are definitely mould lines, but they're not too excessive and should be quite straightforward to remove. There are a lot of parts here, which makes sense considering you can build the early, mid and late versions of this tank. And there are 2 commanders, one British and the other American. The Honey is what the British called the M3 Stuart. I'm sure the early version is the most British one, but this kit could probably also be used to represent an American Stuart just fine. You could probably quite easily use it as a Soviet tank too. Also included in the box is this instruction leaflet. It shows which parts on the sprue are intended for which version of the tank, and has an image of each version. The actual instructions on the other side are fairly clear and easily understood, but they only really cover the early version. All versions do build up more or less the same, but there is some differences between them that aren't covered in the instructions. You'll just have to use the images as a reference and figure it out for yourself. Shouldn't be too hard anyway. There are no decals or anything else included in this kit. I do kind of wish they would supply decals. The Plastic Soldier Company does make decals, and they're kind of good. Why they don't include them with their kits is beyond me. Oh well. Let's put this thing together, starting with the turret. I've chosen to build the mid-war version of this tank. As noted before, the instructions don't show the assembly for this particular turret, but they're more or less the same anyway, just different parts. I pressed the 2 halves of the turret body together like so. It fits together very tightly, so instead of pulling it apart after test fitting, I leave the parts together and add some glue. The Tamiya Extra Thin should seep into the gaps and bond everything nicely. Next comes the roof. This goes on very easily, as you can see. Looks very roofy. The early version has a cupola for the commander, but this one doesn't, so we move right along and install the commander's hatch. This also fits into place very easily and looks nice and neat. Of course, if you wanted to, you could model this open and have a commander standing up out of the hatch. Obviously, I've opted not to do this. Then, I put the turret front on. Unsurprisingly, this is easy. The part has some keying, though there is a little bit of play in it, so you might have to nudge it around a bit until it looks right. Now we need a way to shoot. We need a gun. The main gun and its coaxial machine gun are moulded into the mantlet. With parts that small, I'm kind of glad they did it that way, saves me some fiddling. The gun slots into the obvious hole for it in the front of the turret. A bit of pressure to push it all the way in, and a little bit of nudging to get the elevation you want, and it's on. I think it looks pretty good. The end is solid, but the gun is too tiny for me to drill the end out, and at this scale I think that's fine and it still looks good. Next, a pintle-mounted machine gun can be installed. I believe this is a 30 cal, and I'm pretty sure it's optional. The mounting pole has a flat side, which is where I've applied the glue. There is no keying for this, so you have to decide the positioning for yourself. I think where I've put it is more or less right. Looks pretty decent. Now, the loader or the commander can have some fun spraying bullets around in any direction they like. Good times. The turret is now complete, so let's see to the hull. I glue the upper and lower halves of the hull together. This is pretty simple. There's a bar along the bottom of the upper hull which acts as a kind of guide at the front of the hull. From the side, you should be able to see where the sloped areas of both parts meet up neatly. If they don't, you've done it wrong. Nothing too tricky here. I then add the tracks. They go on quite easily. There's a sort of keying that helps you get the positioning right. It's pretty much the same for both sides though, so you could probably put these on backwards, but I don't think you really want to do that. I do like that these are single parts, rather than the multi-part tracks that some Plastic Soldier Company kits have. This is way easier to install, and there are no gaps where sections of track join together, which is always a positive. Next, I fill in the huge hole in the tank's rear with this plate. As you can see, there is some keying along the bottom, which makes it very easy to get this plate into place correctly. I follow that with this upper rear part, whatever you would call it. It has tools on it and it's keyed so that it's pretty hard to install wrong. The shovel should be on top. Looks pretty decent. Then these air filtery things can be installed. There are tabs to make sure this sits flat against the hull, but there isn't really any keying. They are a little bit fiddly to get on neatly, but not impossible. Otherwise I wouldn't be able to get them on, and as you can see, I did. Though I did get one at a slight angle. Nothing too horrible though, so I'm not too worried about it. Then I went to add the stowage boxes. I encountered a minor problem there. There's a protrusion on the side of the rear toolie bit that prevents the box from being installed flush against the hull. I simply trimmed that off. Easy enough. Then, looking at this and the example of the mid-war tank on the instruction sheet, I noticed the mudguard thing at the rear wasn't quite as long as it seems like it should be. You can see just how different it is compared to the early hull. To be honest, I really can't see much of a difference between these hulls at all except for the rear fender bits. The problem is, the stowage box should be kind of sitting on the rear fender. I think I will build the next 4 of these with the early hull. I don't see it making a lot of difference really. I glue the boxes on anyway. This isn't too hard, though there's nothing to guide them. I think the way I've put them on is just about right though. You can't really see it from the video here, but the boxes have a little tab thing that comes down and should be resting against the fender. On this model it's just hanging in the air. Probably not the biggest deal, but it doesn't look quite right to me. Oh well, moving on, it's time to install the hull side panels. There's no keying, but these are very easy to install anyway. There are 3 of these, so be sure to select the right one for your version. The mid-war one has the holes for the machine guns on the front patched up. Next come the hatches for the driver and hull gunner. This simply slots onto the front of the hull like so. Very easy. One final fiddly part, the hull machine gun. Tweezers are highly recommended for this. There's a little bit of flexibility in this. You don't have to have the gun pointed perfectly straight ahead. Once you're happy with its positioning, the tank is complete. The turret has a tab locking system like you would often find on 28mm scale tanks. You don't need to be a tank surgeon to work out how this attaches. And that's one adorable little M3 Honey in 15mm scale from the Plastic Soldier Company completed. I don't have any other Stuarts or Honeys or whatever you would like to call these to compare this model with. Maybe I need to get some. Eventually there probably will be a comparison. I think this model looks very good. The build process was enjoyable and fairly quick. The only issues I had with it were the fenders at the rear of the hull, but that's quite a minor issue really. Everything else fit together well. Mold lines were easily removed. They're a bit more prominent than on some of the other models I've built recently, but they were by no means bad. I think this model is a pretty decent representation of an M3 Stuart or Honey. Stuart Honey? Stunny? Hanart? It's no display piece, and at this scale there has to be some compromise on detail. That said, the detail on this model is quite good. There's a bunch of rivet detail that looks nice, and isn't obnoxiously huge and should catch paint quite nicely. This kit should have some flexibility and usefulness for a variety of forces in your games of Flames of War, or whichever other games you play that use models in this scale. This kind of tank was used by the Americans, obviously, and also the British, Australians and Soviets, and probably some others that I'm forgetting. I'll almost certainly be painting mine British, but that's not going to happen for a long while. My to paint list is already way too long. So, what do you think? Have you built this kit? How about the Battlefront version? Let me know in the comments below, along with any other questions or comments you might have. And of course do all the things like subscribing to me here on YouTube, following me on social media, and watching me live stream on Twitch. And if you really like the things I do, please consider helping to support the channel over at Patreon, or maybe even buying some merch. Links to all of those things are in the description below. As always, I shall return soon, so until then, be excellent to each other, happy modelling, and thanks for watching. Farewell.